What do you like? Tell me what you like.
I love the idea of nourishing both our body and our soul.
Welcome to the Nourishing You podcast presented by the National Association of Nutrition Professionals, NANP. We invite you to join Kristen Burkett and Diana Wally as they host experts from the holistic wellness space who will share practical tips and information to enhance your health and vitality. Kristen and Diana are master nutrition therapists and board certified in holistic nutrition with private practices that support their clients as they strive to reach their full potential. If you enjoy today's show, please help us out by commenting below, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel to help us spread the word.
You have to move your body. That's my message. That's my passion.
This episode of the Nourishing You podcast is brought to you by Jane App.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Nourishing You podcast. We're honored to talk with Dr. Monique Aucoin today about food and nutrition for mental health. Dr. Monique Aucoin is a naturopathic doctor and senior research fellow at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. She's an adjunct professor at the University of Guelph in the Department of Human Health and Nutritional Sciences. She's been in practice for more than 13 years. Her clinical practice and research work are focused on the role of diet and nutrition in the treatment of mental illness. She recently led the world's first clinical trial of dietary counseling for the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dr. Aucoin.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
As holistic nutrition professionals ourselves, we're really excited to dive into the nutritional aspects of mental health with you, Dr. Aucoin. It's of deep interest to Kristen and me and to our listeners, especially with mental health issues on the rise. So to kick things off, we'd love to get a short recap of your personal story and how you became so passionate about this area of health and wellness.
Yeah, so, as was mentioned in my bio, I've been in practice as a naturopathic doctor for over a decade. And in my practice, I've been really interested in supporting people with mood and anxiety disorders. And I had a case actually that was really, really impactful on the trajectory of my career that really got me thinking about the role of nutrition. Is it okay if I tell you about it? Yeah.
Please.
So this happened in about 2016. There was a young adult that came into my practice, and she had quite severe anxiety symptoms as well as hypoglycemia symptoms. And when I talked to her about what she was eating, she was eating like white bread and white pasta and candy and cookies and gummy bears. And it was really sort of simple carbohydrates. And so I asked her to make some changes to add some protein, some fiber, some healthy fats. And sure enough, after a couple of weeks, her anxiety symptoms dramatically improved along with her hypoglycemia symptoms. And I thought, wow, that was really exciting to see that have such a significant impact. But when I looked at the scientific evidence on this topic of what do we know about the relationship between dietary glycemic index, how quickly certain foods convert to sugar, and how that might be related to hypoglycemia and anxiety. And there was almost nothing in the scientific literature on that topic. And like I said, this was less than 10 years ago. And I thought, wow, this is really shocking that the medical and research communities are not paying attention to this relationship. And this really inspired me. So I wrote that paper up as a case report and published it because I thought, this is something that warrants further investigation. And it really became the basis of some of the research that I've done since, which is to really try and investigate what is that impact of diet on anxiety symptoms and how might it play a role in making people more prone to this type of illness and how can it be used therapeutically as a treatment approach. So that was a really defining moment in my career that influenced the research and clinical work that I've done since.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, we're really grateful that you came into this work and you're doing more to prove the point, and get some of that research done. You're, in our opinion, you're breaking new ground in real time with the research that you're doing and what you're bringing out to people. Really helps people understand the powerful ways that food impacts the brain. So maybe you can expand a little bit more to us. And I'd almost like to just go back and define the term nutritional psychiatry, because that's kind of a new term in that space in the field. If you can talk about that and maybe the fundamentals of how food and mental health are connected, I think that'd be a great way to start the discussion.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, intuitively, a lot of us know that what we eat impacts how we feel both physically and emotionally. But this area of scientific study is relatively new. So it's only been in the last sort of 15 or 20 years that there's been this new interest in studying the relationship between nutrition and mental health. And that's nutritional psychiatry is what that's all about, is how does food and nutrition impact mental health? And so it started off with a significant body of observational research. So this is where the researchers aren't telling people to do anything. They're just capturing what are people doing in their daily lives and looking for patterns. So there were quite a lot of observational studies done that looked at what are people's eating habits like and what's their mental health like. And these consistently found a pattern that poor dietary patterns were associated with poor mental health. So they recognize there's a connection here. But the problem is with a lot of this observational research is that it's really hard to tell what came first. We, as a nutrition researcher, I'm really curious, what impact did nutrition have? Did people eating a poor quality diet, did that make them more prone to developing depression? But those observational research studies can't really tell the difference between that and maybe having depression cause people to eat a poor quality diet. We know that one of the symptoms of depression is low motivation, and it requires motivation to prepare healthy food for yourself. We also know that some of the symptoms of depression can impact cravings. And so it's very complex. So the observational research told us, there's something here. There's some connection between nutrition and mental health, but it couldn't tell us the direction of that effect or a lot of details. But the good news is that we've advanced. So it started off with this observational research, and now we've actually got experimental or clinical research that's come out more recently. And that's able to help us answer this question more about cause and effect. So there have been about 5 studies now that have looked at dietary modification as a treatment for depression. It started with a study in 2017 in Australia called the SMILES trial. And they recruited adult participants with moderate to severe depression and gave them basically the Mediterranean diet for 12 weeks. And sure enough, they saw a significant reduction in the depression symptom severity, which was really exciting. Again, these were people with moderate to severe depression at the beginning of the study. And at the end of the study, about a quarter no longer met criteria for having depression at all. So really exciting findings that came out of that. And that study has been now replicated, like I said, a couple of times in different geographic locations with slightly different patient populations. But the findings have been consistent that when we modify people's diet to improve diet quality, we see a reduction in depression symptom severity. So that's really exciting. And then our study was the first to look at anxiety.
Okay. So do you want to go into more detail about your study?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was called the EASE GAD study. It stood for Eating and Supplementation for Generalized Anxiety Disorder. And we recruited 50 adult women with moderate to severe generalized anxiety symptoms that were confirmed, that diagnosis was confirmed by a psychiatrist as part of our team. And we randomly assigned them to either a waitlist control or a treatment program that involved 12 weeks of bi-weekly dietary counseling, one-on-one, and an omega-3 supplement. So they're changing their diet and taking an omega-3 supplement. And because this was the first time this question was asked, we primarily looked at things like feasibility and acceptability, and we found that it was feasible to conduct the study and that it was highly acceptable. We got very high levels of satisfaction reported by the study participants. But we also assessed anxiety symptom severity, and we saw about a 55% reduction in anxiety symptom severity over the course of 12 weeks as a result of participating in this intervention. So we were really excited by those findings and really encouraged to keep studying this area.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you alluded to previously about your patient eating gummy bears, and it sounded like Halloween, basically, the Halloween diet, gummy bears and candy and that sort of thing, and a really heavy carbohydrate diet, refined carbohydrate diet. So you mentioned those types of foods. What other types of foods are really detrimental for mental health? Other than, is there something we're not, candy seems like it's fairly obvious. Are there other things that maybe we're not thinking about that are detrimental?
Yeah. So in our study, we actually focused on talking more about what we want people to add. So yes, there's certainly things we want people to eat less of, but our focus as much as possible in our study was to add things in. We know that the more we can add certain foods, the less room we have for other things. So we really encourage people to eat more vegetables, more fruit, more legumes, nuts and seeds, olive oil, fish and seafood. So there was a big emphasis on adding beneficial foods, with the recognition that as people were doing that, they would be having less of things like the ultra processed foods, the takeout and convenience foods. So really things like cooking more and preparing more food at home. So the sugar one is really interesting because it really ties into that piece about blood sugar regulation and how that impacts mental health. Our brain is a unique organ. It can't make its own sugar and it can't store it. So it's really reliant on that sugar that's available in the blood. And when our blood sugar regulation is more balanced, that's better for mental health. Whereas if it's more turbulent, more ups and downs, we see that that has a negative impact on mental health. And the world sort of knows this as like the concept of being hangry. Most people have heard that term, which really ties in this idea that our blood sugar and our hunger levels can have this emotional effect. So some people feel angry, but other people feel sad, other people feel irritable or anxious. And it's a great example about how food and nutrition is related to mental health functioning that most people have experienced. So thinking about blood sugar regulation is one piece of that. And, having less of the candy, yes, is certainly one part of it, but adding fiber, so choosing a complex carb instead of a simple one, the fiber helps to keep blood sugar more balanced. Also thinking about balanced meals, so getting protein and healthy fats, not just eating carbohydrates in isolation.
So if blood sugar is one of the pathways in which you found food was impacting mental health, were there other pathways that you discovered as well?
Yeah, so there's lots that have been proposed. It's actually quite complex, which makes it challenging to study, but there's lots of mechanisms that have been identified. Blood sugar is one. Another one is inflammation. So there's this new body of evidence that suggests that people with mental disorders have higher levels of inflammation compared to healthy controls in both their body and in their brain as well. So the same way that somebody who has arthritis might have inflammation in their knee, it seems that people with anxiety and mood disorders seem to have higher levels of inflammation as well. And when inflammation is made worse, their symptoms get worse. When inflammation is decreased, their symptoms improve. So one of the big drivers of inflammation in the body is the diet. There's certain dietary factors that can contribute positively or negatively to inflammation. So things like vegetables and fruit have lots of anti-inflammatory components to them. The more variety of things like colors are going to have different anti-inflammatory constituents. So those are really important. Also think about anti-inflammatory fats, things like omega-3s and 9, so fish and flax and olive oil and avocado, other ways that we can add anti-inflammatory components to the diet.
Is that where the omega-3 supplement came in? Was it because of the inflammatory pathway? Is that why that was
Exactly.
important?
Yeah. And there's quite a body of evidence that suggests that omega-3s are helpful with depression. There's a little bit less work that's been done for anxiety. But in the case of depression, there's quite good evidence that high dose, high EPA formulas, that's one of the 2 omega-3s that are found, seem to be quite helpful with mood disorders.
And then I was curious too, because you sort of alluded to it, that, and by the way, I think I can speak for Kristen on this. We love the idea of adding things to somebody's diet. It all, you probably experience this with patients, but you'll meet a client and the first thing they say is, don't take my coffee, don't take my tea, you're going to take my this, you're going to take my that. So approaching it from adding, it just seems so much of a more positive approach, a more doable approach for people. So I love that. But I'm curious, in addition to the foods, are there patterns? So for example, did you notice anything about breakfast eaters versus breakfast skippers? People who may, practice time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, which is all the buzz right now. What do we know about that?
So there's been a little bit of evidence, a little bit of research that's been done to look at time-restricted eating or breakfast skipping and anxiety. And the consensus seems to be that it can make anxiety worse. And that's what I've seen clinically, is that for certainly time restricted eating has some benefits metabolically and in diabetes. There's some evidence that it can be helpful. But what I've seen in practice is that if people are prone to anxiety and they get hypoglycemic in the morning, if they're delaying that breakfast, that tends to make anxiety worse. So this is one group where I wouldn't encourage that dietary pattern.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what about caffeine?
Yeah, so same. Yeah. So after I wrote that case report, along with some other researchers, we did what was called a scoping review, where we tried to look really broadly at the evidence on the topic of diet and anxiety. And I can share the link for this and for the case report as well, if you want to share it with your audience. But we looked at quite a large volume of literature on what was known about diet and anxiety. And one thing that came up often was caffeine. And that the symptoms of too much caffeine are really similar to the symptoms of anxiety. So for people who are prone to anxiety, that can exacerbate those symptoms. So as part of our diet and anxiety clinical trial, we did ask all of our participants to think about their caffeine intake and pay a little bit more attention to how that might be impacting their symptoms, and experiment, if they were open to it, experiment a little bit with reducing that caffeine, whether that was, switching from coffee to green tea or choosing a decaf version of their caffeinated product or just, consuming a little bit less. But that was one of the recommendations that we included.
Yeah, just anecdotally, because you mentioned green tea, because that has the component L-theanine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which sort of tampons down, if that's the right way to say it, that caffeine jittery feeling and
Mm-hmm.
things. And I have one of my adult daughters seems to be great on coffee. She's fantastic. The other one does notice that she just explained it as I don't like the way it makes me feel if I drink coffee. I think it tastes good, it smells good, but I don't like the way it makes me feel. But she loves matcha, green tea, and she's like, oh, and it still get a really energized feeling, but nothing negative from it whatsoever. Like I don't feel anxious or any of that. So that's just really interesting and helpful for maybe somebody who does enjoy caffeine, but coffee's not their friend.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
The team at Jane knows how it feels to search for that one software that just gets your clinic's unique needs. We've been there too, and it's actually how Jane App came to life. Jane App is a clinic management software and electronic medical record that's built to help make clinic life easier for you. Jane offers helpful features like easy online booking, flexible scheduling, customizable documentation, a secure payment solution, and more. Jane even helps you get paid on time and in full with integrated insurance billing. And the best part is that with Jane, you're not alone. Support is unlimited, so you can rely on our friendly team to answer any questions that come up at any point in your Jane journey. Head to jane.app to book a one-on-one demo with a member of our support team.
I know a lot of people are, when they hear about changing their diets and things like that to support any kind of a condition or issue they're dealing with, they can be very put off by the thought of having to give up a lot of the things. And I know we're adding a lot of things here, but my curiosity is, do you think people need to eat a certain way 100% of the time to see benefits, or is there room for some flexibility?
Oh, definitely. There's room for flexibility. Yeah. So again, as I said, in our study, we were really focused on adding things in, not about restricting or eliminating, because that doesn't tend to be sustainable for a lot of people. They tend to feel deprived if they're asked to completely avoid something. And then if they sort of inevitably do end up eating that thing, then they can feel really discouraged. And that's not that's not going to be motivating to continue. So one of the outcomes that we measured in our study was self-efficacy, people's belief that they could make change and that they could control things that were influencing their health. And that was something that we saw a significant impact on, that people felt that they had control and the agency and ability to impact change, which was really encouraging. And I think it comes from those sort of flexible guidelines and a focus on positive goals rather than avoiding or limiting. And just, in my own personal life, I think that it's okay to have some flexibility. In my clinical practice, I tell people, like, I don't really care what you do one day a week. That's not going to have a really big impact on your health. But the things that you do 4 days a week or 5 days a week, those meals or snacks that are really regular occurrences, those should be in line with your health goals.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. I want to make sure for our audience we do a good definition here, because your study was based on generalized anxiety disorder. We know it's a big issue. I think it's around 6.8 million adults here in the US. I'm not sure what it is in Canada, but I would imagine
Pretty
the
common.
percentages are probably about the same. I just like to get a basic definition of what that is and the major symptoms that are associated with it, so our audience can relate to, does this relate to me or not?
Sure. So anxiety is that experience of, worry or nervousness, and that's part of everyday life for everyone. That can be normal in response to certain situations that are anxiety provoking. So it can be normal. When we talk about anxiety disorders, that's where there's sort of a line that gets crossed here. This is where the symptoms are impacting people's functioning. They're impacting their quality of life, or they're impacting their ability to go to work or go to school, or impacting their relationships. So when it crosses that line to a disorder, when it's having this significant impact. But we see some of those thoughts about nervousness or worry, as well as physical symptoms. So people with generalized anxiety disorder often experience things like physical symptoms like feeling shaky or heart palpitations or digestive symptoms. They can also experience restlessness, physical tension, or trouble sleeping. So those are, again, some of the symptoms, and these can be normal in response to a situation, but when those are prolonged or out of proportion with the trigger or having this impact on people's lives, that's when we're talking more about an anxiety disorder.
I think that's helpful. Yeah. To put it in context. Also, I've been thinking about, you mentioned a little bit earlier that often people with these mental health challenges can have a hard time getting started to make change because they have so much anxiety or depression. So do you have any tips? Like, did you do anything with your study participants to sort of get them started? Do you have any tips for someone that in the audience that might be listening to this of how to get started with adding these healthy foods to their diet if they're stuck in a hard place?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a concern that gets voiced a lot when some of us researchers are out there talking in the community about nutrition and mental health. Sometimes people say, people with depression maybe can't make these changes, or this would be too difficult. But that seems to actually be a misconception, that when we look at the body of evidence that exists so far, it seems that people with mood and anxiety disorders do respond well to these treatments, that they are able to make changes to their diet and lifestyle. But, the new unique thing to think about in these studies is that there was regular support from a health professional. So I think that component is really important. In our study, the first visit with the participant talked about some education about why nutrition might impact mental health, helping people to understand a little bit of the science behind it and the rationale for why we're asking people to change their diet. But then the rest of the study really focused on how do we make that happen? Because we all know sort of some basic concepts about, healthy foods and unhealthy foods, but it's like putting it into practice is actually really, really hard. Changing behavior is really, really difficult. Humans are all creatures of habit, and this is tough stuff to make changes to the way we eat. Some people, you've been eating a certain way for your whole life, and that can be really, really challenging to try and switch it up. So there was a big focus in our study on how do we make this happen. So when we met each time with the participants, there was goal setting. So we set really specific goals. So this was about, getting down to the nitty gritty. So not just I'm going to eat more vegetables, but maybe I'm going to take salads to my lunch, and I'm going to do that 3 times a week. And I'm going to include lettuce and a bunch of other veggies, and I'm going to throw on a protein source in there or something. And getting people to really make a clear plan of what they wanted to accomplish, really laying out what they wanted to do, and then identifying barriers. So, I asked participants, what could interfere with this? Like, what could get in the way of having that salad for lunch? And they might say, well, I might not have time to make it, or I might forget, or, whatever. They would know what those possible barriers were that could interfere. And then we tried to come up with what are some strategies that we can put in place proactively, recognizing that these are the barriers that might come up. What can we plan to do? So, if you're not going to have time, maybe you plan to buy it, or maybe you plan to make it the night before. If making it in the morning is not going to be, you're going to be too rushed. Like, what kind of strategies can we put in place to set you up for success? And, getting the right ingredients, all like thinking through all the components of what needs to happen for somebody to be successful in the school. And then really harnessing their motivation, like thinking through why is this important to somebody, writing those things down and really making it clear why this is important, harnessing that like intrinsic motivation that people have of why they want to make these changes. And then accountability. So, then we met 2 weeks later and we asked people, how did it go? What, did you accomplish the goal? If we did, we celebrate that. If not, then we think about, what were the barriers that came up, what interfered, and how can we come up with some strategies so that somebody could be successful the next time around when we focus on that goal. So really focusing a lot on how do we make it happen, because that's really, really the hard part. And we also looked into the literature to see what was unique about people with anxiety and some factors that might be interfering and are impacting diet quality. And we found that there's some research about eating in response to emotions. Sometimes people call this like comfort eating or emotional eating. And we recognize that phenomenon is more common among this patient population. So we developed some strategies for that too. We helped people to think through how they could respond in situations where they felt like eating in response to boredom or anxiety or worry or feeling down, coming up with some alternate strategies that they could use in those situations, because we recognize that this was a driver of eating in that population.
So you're just making me smile, because as I'm listening to everything you're describing, for all of our nutrition therapists out in our audience and all of my students out there taking my nutrition and therapy course, this is exactly where the rubber meets the road in being successful with clients, whether it's generalized anxiety disorder or anything else, in changing eating habits. It's the how. You're really getting into the nitty-gritty of the how. And that's what makes good nutrition therapists as well, is helping people really get in and dig in and identify how to make their changes, how to do it to meet their needs and all of that. So it's music to our ears to hear that we have somebody in your field that's doing this work very specifically with this particular issue and other mental health issues.
Yeah, I think it's so great. And I was thinking the same thing, Kristen. I'm like, oh, I love that part about my job. And even telling people, I don't know if you both get this, but people think that I'm, Ina Gardner or some like fancy chef. Yeah, like, no, I have frozen broccoli in my freezer if I'm running late, or frozen berries if berries don't look good at the store, or pre-washed greens. I'm much more likely to eat something like that than if I have this, head of lettuce. I have to wash it, put it in the salad spinner, when. But little things like that, and to see light bulbs go off, like, oh, that's an idea, And so I love those tips. And I also love, it sounds like you're using the SMART goals almost.
Yep.
Which we have some training into, which are it's just incredible. But kind of on that, did you, in this, I have no idea if you did this or not, but did you incorporate or encourage any other lifestyle modifications? For example, like maybe patients could get some sunshine or exercise or sleep modifications. Did you guys delve into any lifestyle factors like that?
That's a great question. We actually didn't, because we really wanted to isolate and focus on what was the effect of the diet change. But interestingly, hear me out, we had people come back and say, I'm feeling so good because I'm eating well. I'm going to start doing Pilates too. And I was like, no, please don't do that.
You're going to ruin our study.
Don't do that. Like, just wait for the end of the 12 weeks and then you can start your Pilates, because I really, we really wanted to measure what was the impact of the diet. But this is a very real phenomenon that people, when they recognize the impact of lifestyle changes, it motivates them to make other changes as well. So it's an exciting spin-off that people want to engage in other positive lifestyle behaviors, and that's great. As a researcher, it makes my life a little bit messy. So, we discouraged it, but it's exciting to see, like you said, when people are taking care of themselves in one way, sometimes they, get excited about other areas too.
I love that. You're like, as a doctor, you should definitely exercise. As a researcher, no.
Please
So-
don't. Yeah.
That's such a great story. Interesting.
I'm really curious with where you're at with this. How do you see nutrition complementing traditional mental health services for treatments like therapy and medication? Where do you see that working in, or what's your vision for the future for that? How do you see that rolling out?
So in our study, about 50% of the participants were taking psychiatric medication and about 50% were doing psychotherapy. So in total, about 60% were either doing one or the other or both. And the nutrition intervention was an add-on. And that's really similar to what's been done in some of the previous studies, that we're not asking people to say, medication or nutrition, that people have to choose one or the other. These things can absolutely be done together. There's no interactions. And there's actually quite a bit of evidence to say that this can be a successful combination of treatments, that people who might be doing whatever treatment but still having symptoms can add nutrition on top of those therapies that they're already doing and see an additional benefit. And I think that's exciting, that people don't have to pick, that it can be taking the best of both worlds and creating a combination of treatments that works best for them.
Yeah. Do you think there will be more professionals in the psychiatric field that will grab onto this and blend it into their practices? Or do you think it's going to continue to be sort of an accessory thing that someone like yourself, who's a naturopath, more than a conventional physician, might look at it?
My hope is that they'll be more integrated in the future. I think that's part of my motivation in doing this research, is to build that evidence base, to understand what exactly is the impact of dietary counseling. And I hope that will, on a policy or a programs level, eventually warrant the inclusion of nutrition professionals within mental health care settings, that under that same roof, people should hopefully be able to see a psychiatrist and a therapist and a nutrition professional as well, to be able to, use all of these different therapies that are important and can help them. And like I said, create that combination of treatments that works for them. Yeah. So I hope it'll be more integrated in the future. I think there's already, some little signs of encouragement, but my hope is that will increase.
Awesome.
I love that. So let's talk about any potential misconceptions that you see around the topic of the, food mood connection or your work, whether it's social media or what have you. Like, what do you see that might be some misconceptions in this area?
I think one that doesn't get talked about enough is protein. I think that when we think about the medical model of mental health, that this idea about neurotransmitters being dysregulated, being sort of the driving factor in mood and anxiety disorders, the approach then is to use medications that modify neurotransmitter levels, which can be tremendously helpful for some people. As a nutrition researcher, I think, okay, well, neurotransmitters are disrupted. Where do we make neurotransmitters from? Oh, they're made from amino acids. We get those from protein. And if people are not getting adequate protein, they just simply don't have that building block available in order to make neurotransmitters. And there are studies that go way back about tryptophan depletion studies, where you give people other amino acids but not enough tryptophan. You can lower their levels of serotonin that way. So this is something that the research has known for quite a long time, that modifying amino acid intake can impact neurotransmitter synthesis. But I think it's something that doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. The sort of traditional North American breakfasts particularly can be sort of carbohydrate focused. And that's one of the things that I talk to people about all the time. I feel like a broken record, is like, let's get some protein in the morning, because people are just, having cereal or waffles or something that's quick and easy and sort of these common breakfasts, but they're not getting protein in the morning. So that's one that I think maybe warrants a little bit more attention, that people are kind of missing, and something that I talk to people a lot about.
Yeah, especially for children, right? Some of at least in the US, sending your child out the door to school with a bowl of Captain Crunch, cereal, or like you said, a waffle. And it's the protein, the lacking of the protein, and then also the blood sugar dysregulation, which you talked about previously. So you're getting it from both sides. Yeah, I mean, we're big believers, and at least in the US, most people are under eating protein.
Mm.
It is getting more press in the United States around health, longevity, lifespan, having more muscle on your body, that sort of thing. But I agree with you that I don't see it related to mental health, positive mental health outcomes as much as the other side of it. But
Yeah, how would you, I know your study focused on general anxiety disorder. I'm sure you see other mental health imbalances as well. Are there other conditions that you think that if you had studies to warrant, that you'd like to bring to life on other conditions that these same principles apply to? I mean, so that people aren't just thinking in the tunnel, oh, well, this just works for anxiety and depression. Are there other conditions that you might mention?
So the good news is that the research about anxiety and depression is very similar. The dietary interventions that were used in our study compared to the depression studies are, again, very similar. There were some slight modifications, but the good news is that sometimes people come in and they say, I have anxiety and depression. Which dietary recommendations should I follow? The good news is they're the same. For some of the less common but more serious mental illnesses, so things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, there's less research that's been done. There's some very novel research on the ketogenic diet that has gained a lot of traction that seems to be sort of specific to those types of disorders, but the research is fairly preliminary, and although there's lots in progress. So I think we'll see a lot more of that coming out in the next few years.
What about ADHD? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so definitely it's an important area to think about nutrition. It's not the focus of my research, but I have some colleagues in Canada and in the United States that have done some exciting work on broad spectrum micronutrients, so supplementing lots of different nutrients. And those have been found to be very helpful among kids with ADHD. Personally, I'm excited about the dietary approach, and I think that eating a whole foods diet, getting people to incorporate more variety and more whole foods are going to be increasing those broad spectrum micronutrients as well. There's, and similar concepts. So things like blood sugar regulation, adequate protein, micronutrients seem to overlap.
And speaking of research, I don't know if you can talk about it. Do you have anything in the works? Any other research project you're excited about?
Yeah, so because our diet and anxiety study was the first time the question had been asked, we only involved 50 participants. So our next step is we're actually in the works of applying for funding to run a larger follow-up study, including a long-term follow-up arm to be able to assess how people do 1 year down the road. So that's what we're working on acquiring funding to be able to do as a follow-up.
Oh, you have to come back. If we'd have you come back and talk about that. That is really
For
exciting.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So if somebody who's listening today, if they could do, let's say, 1, 2, 3 nutritional steps, like if they could implement that today after watching to improve their mental health, what would you suggest? Maybe give us top 3.
3 things.
Yeah.
I would say, maybe this is cheating, but I would say connect with a nutrition professional because I think
yes.
yeah, whether that's, a nutritionist or a dietitian or a naturopathic doctor or, a medical doctor that's trained in this area is because I think that accountability piece and empowerment and somebody to help you in that process is really important. But then, all the things I mentioned, the fruits and veg, the legumes, totally underrated. Fiber, we didn't even get into that. Fiber in the microbiome, so important. And, get enough protein. Those are my few.
Well, maybe circle back around. We have a couple more minutes. Circle back around to the fiber, legumes, gut microbiome. Put that together for us, because I feel like that's one additional pathway. We talked about some pathways. We talked about blood sugar. We talked about inflammation. So maybe
protein.
Connect. Yeah, right. Let's connect this one as well.
Yeah, so the gut microbiome, these are all the bacteria that live in and on our body. And we have this incredible symbiotic relationship where they produce all kinds of metabolites that are incredibly important for aspects of our health, including our brain and mental health. That the healthier our gut microbiome, the more of these positive constituents that they create, which have a positive effect on mental health. And it's a bi-directional relationship. So they make stuff for us, but we feed them. So they eat fiber, which is the carbohydrates that we consume but can't digest. We can't break down fiber for energy, but the bacteria in our digestive system can. And so there's this body of evidence that's expanding about the relationship between the microbiome and mental health and how that's really important. And oftentimes when I talk to people about this, the first thing they say is, oh, we should take probiotics. And I often say, well, hold on. Actually, the food that we eat is really, really important in shaping the health of our gut microbiome. There's a study that I talk about all the time because I think it's so exciting. It was a diet swap study. Listen to how cool this is. So they recruited people in rural Africa and they fed them an American diet, the standard American diet, and they recruited African Americans in the United States and fed them a traditional African diet. So they swapped people's diets. And after just a 2-week period, they observed this shocking change in the composition of their microbiome. So the traditional African diet was high fiber and low fat, and the traditional American diet was high fat and low fiber. And just by switching those two dietary components, they saw this huge shift in the health of people's microbiome. So I really encourage people, if you're thinking about microbiome, if you're looking at that new research about microbiome and mental health, don't jump to the probiotic. Think about what we're eating. The fiber that we eat feeds our gut microbiome, and that in turn impacts so many different processes that impact our mental health. It's very complex. We're really just at the forefront of understanding the complex interplay of these factors, but it's really encouraging, the research that's come out so far.
Yeah. And it's just, another plus there for the fruits and veggies that are those brightly colored, dark, deep colored fruits and veggies that have those beautiful polyphenols. Those
exactly. Yeah. And like you said, the legumes,
Yeah.
the lentils and beans and chickpeas and the fiber, so many North Americans are getting way below the recommended amount of fiber. And that fiber, it helps our microbiome health, but it also helps to balance blood sugar, as we talked about. So many of these factors are really interrelated and overlapping.
Yeah, I think most recently I think the average diet is less than 12 grams of fiber a day, which is really, really low. And the recommended is 35 or above. Yeah.
Lots of work to be done talking about fiber.
Okay. So we've got, see somebody that can help you and you can be accountable to.
Yeah.
We've got increase your fiber, right? So we talked about that. Was there one other thing that you'd like?
Get enough protein.
Enough protein. I think that speaks to a lot of different conditions out there, but especially for mental health. That's awesome. All right.
Well, this has been so enlightening, incredible. And I just want to know, so our listeners love finding out from our guests how you incorporate all the things that we've talked about today into your own diet and lifestyle, and especially being a published researcher and a doctor and a mom of 2 children. Like, how do you do it? What does a day in the life look like?
Oh, well, I have some shortcuts that I try and follow. I'm somebody who's a little bit prone to decision fatigue. So we have some preset things. Our breakfasts are scheduled and we stick to that to just know the plan and keep things really simple.
Wait, sorry, what do you mean? You have a meal plan every day for breakfast, or?
Yeah, we have a certain breakfast that's planned each day of the week, and to avoid having to think too much about it, we stick to that. So,
favorite? What's your favorite?
Favorite breakfast? On Thursdays we do smoothies, and I like those.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I little things like that to me help to avoid having to think too much. It makes it easy to grocery shop. It makes it easy to make sure that we have everything that we need. And there's no discussion. My kids know what's for breakfast each day of the week. So doing things that sort of helped us to take some of the guesswork out, those help for sure.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, when my kids were younger and home, I would always, I'm an omnivore. I really enjoy protein and meats and things. And so I would always plan, I would meal plan and Monday through Sunday. And my kids would always know. And I would mix up the sides, like sweet potatoes or white potatoes or quinoa or whatever in the vegetable. But they would always know, like, Monday's chicken, Tuesdays, beef because we're having tacos, and Wednesday's salmon. And so that was, we did that same thing. And I thought it made things It's just so simple
Mhm.
and not reinventing the wheel, but you can also mix it up. So even if it was, always chicken on Monday, for example, maybe it's a roast chicken or maybe it's grilled chicken. So they think it's this new and exciting, thing. But doing that for breakfast too is such a good idea because as we discussed earlier, that's often one that's just that refined carbohydrate that's really quick and easy. But if you can plan like a good protein smoothie or some type of egg dish or something, that's a really, really good idea to do for breakfast.
Well, this has just been super inspiring, and it just really enforces that, how we nourish ourselves makes such a difference to getting the mental health that we deserve. And, everybody deserves to feel good mentally, emotionally, as well as physically. So I'm hoping our listeners will take some pearls from today and incorporate that into their lives. And just want to thank you for being such a passionate pioneer in this area, because we need you. We need your research. We need, unfortunately, to prove it out with research for it to be accepted in, more of the masses. But we're just really grateful to have you in this space.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to cover? Do you think we nailed it?
No, this is great. Thank you so much for covering this topic. I think it's really important to have these kinds of discussions. So thank you for your work on this.
Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And thank you everybody out there for listening and tuning in. We always appreciate you. And if you liked this, please give us a good rating, good review, share it with a friend, and make sure that you look in the show notes for the links to the research that we discussed. So until next time, be well. Thanks, everyone.
Visit www.jane.app for more information today. Don't miss a beat. Find other episodes and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube or check us out on your favorite streaming app. Now available on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and more. You can also visit nanp.org for more information. Looking for a board-certified holistic nutrition professional to support you on your health journey? Go to nanp.org to get started today. Membership in the NANP provides you with a competitive advantage. Whether you're a current practitioner or a student, we want you to become an active, informed leader of the holistic nutrition community and join our association today. When you're ready to go a step further, you can boost your credibility by becoming board certified in holistic nutrition. Visit nanp.org today to apply. The information on the NANP podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or legal advice. The NANP is not liable or responsible for any harm, damage, or illness arising from the use of the information contained herein. By listening to the information on this podcast, you agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the NANP and all agents. Copyright NANP, all rights reserved. Until next time, stay nourished.